On Syria, too, Matt, we know that you are against the Assad regime and you are against HTS, but in the past you supported the rebels, the moderate rebels. Do you support them now in their invasion or in their retaking of the territories in Syria?
So we are making clear that we want to see de-escalation of the situation. I don't think I could be any more clear about that. And ultimately, we want to see a political process forward. You were right that the organization that launched this offensive over the weekend is a terrorist organization designated as such by the United States. We certainly do not support that organization in any way, shape, or form. I know I've seen various rumors floating around, not just floating around social media, but in some cases, claims made by people who ought to have credibility that we were somehow behind this offensive. That could not be further from the truth. It is false in every way, shape, or form.
You don't support HTS, but you supported and you've been supporting other rebels who are...
There are groups that we have supported in the fight against ISIS in Syria. As you know, the United States has engaged a coalition in Syria and Iraq to fight the growth of ISIS, and we continue to support that work to fight the growth of ISIS, to keep ISIS from reemerging as a terrorist threat. As you know, ISIS was a terrorist threat not just in the region, but ultimately a terrorist threat against the United States. It was responsible for a number of terrorist attacks inside the United States, and we are committed to seeing that ISIS continue to be contained and ultimately defeated once and for all. But when it comes to the process inside Syria and the path forward for Syria, we want to see a de-escalatory path, and we want to see a political process, or a political path forward.
On Lebanon now, there are violations of the ceasefire from Israel and Hezbollah. Are you aware of that, and what's your assessment of the ceasefire?
So let me say this about the ceasefire that went into place last week after fairly intense couple months of diplomatic work by the United States. Led principally by the President's Special Envoy, by Amos Hochstein, but engaged really by people throughout the government to get over the finish line. So what we have seen since the ceasefire went into effect is it being successful. Broadly speaking, it has been successful in stopping the fighting and getting us on a path where we are not seeing the just daily loss of life that we had seen for 2 months prior. Now, with respect to violations or potential violations of the ceasefire, we set a mechanism up to look into this very question, where the United States, along with France, will engage with the Israeli military, will engage with the Lebanese military to look at potential violations. We obviously anticipated that there might be violations because anytime, or nearly any time, you have a ceasefire of this nature, you have either claimed violations of the ceasefire, especially in the opening weeks when things are very fragile, or you have real violations of a ceasefire. So what we are doing is engaging through this mechanism to look at all of these reports of violations of the ceasefire and deal with them through the channels that the mechanism set up, and that's what we'll do over the coming days.
And a couple of ones too, if you don't mind. Speaker Berry has set January 9th as a date for the Lebanese parliament to elect a new president. Was that part of the ceasefire agreement that the U.S. brokered?
It was not a part of the ceasefire agreement, but we have always made clear to the government of Lebanon, to political actors in Lebanon, that we wanted to see a president elected by the parliament as soon as possible. As you know, because you and I have talked about it many times in this room, we have been pushing for the election of a new president for several years now, dating back well before October 7th, dating well back before the intensification of conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in September of this year. And we continue to push for the election of a new president because we think it's important to strengthening Lebanese political institutions.
My last one, does the U.S. still support the LAF commander, Joseph Aoun, to be the next president, as Axios has reported?
We are not, sorry, did not mean to cut you off. We are not taking sides in that election. We have been quite clear from day one. You have heard us say this publicly, and I can tell you, sitting in a number of these meetings, that we have been consistent privately as well, that it is up to Lebanon to choose its next president. It is not up to the United States. It is not up to any external actor. It is up to Lebanese political actors to determine who the president will be.
Thank you.
Quickly put a point on just one thing.
Sure.
When you said that it's broadly speaking successful, the ceasefire is holding, basically, in your view, despite what you see.
Look, the ceasefire is holding. Now, look, obviously, when you have any ceasefire, you can see violations of it, and that's why we set up this mechanism in the first place, because we knew that there would be potential violations. Just as anywhere in the world, when you see a ceasefire implemented, you see various violations at times. Ultimately, what we don't want to see is the ceasefire breakdown, and we've not seen the ceasefire breakdown. When we get reports of potential violations, we have a mechanism that we put in place with the government of France to look at those potential violations, determine if they are in fact violations, and then engage with the parties to ensure that they aren't repeated.
Have you determined whether there are violations, that there have been violations over the past
This
days?
is work that's ongoing through the mechanism. I think it's appropriate for me to let that mechanism do its work privately and speak to the parties before I talk about the results of that work from the podium here. And I should add, it's not just that's also the case because this is not just it's not just the U.S. that is a participant in this mechanism. The government of France is as well. So we need to engage with our partners about these reports
that
of violations.
almost raised violations with the Israeli government. Can you say whether those were adjudicated or just concerns of potential violations?
I'm not going to speak to those reports other than what I've already said, which is we take all of them very seriously, and we work through the mechanism that we set up to adjudicate them. And ultimately, if we do see violations of the ceasefire, we'll go to the parties and tell them to knock it off. We want to see the ceasefire hold. We want to see it be successful. We want to see people be able to return to their homes in southern Lebanon and northern Israel.
Under the terms of the agreement, does the U.S. believe Israel has the right to take kinetic military action if they themselves deem something to have been a violation or a potential threat? Do they have the right to then militarily launch any sort of operation into Lebanon?
So, first of all, there's a mechanism, and I think it is. Before I get to the broader answer, it's important that the mechanism be allowed to work and determine what are violations and what are not. But every country, both Israel, every country, that includes Israel and includes Lebanon as well, has the inherent right to self-defense under international law. That was a fact before the implementation of this ceasefire agreement. It remains a fact that all countries have the right to self-defense under international law.
Well, the reason I asked, Matt, is there are reports coming out of Israel now that the Israelis have informed the U.S. that they intend to strike Lebanon in response to the Hezbollah projectiles that were fired earlier today. Does that fit within the confines of the agreement?
I am not going to speak to reports of possible action, hypothetical action, and try to litigate from here whether those would violate the ceasefire agreement or not. We're going to have those conversations privately. We have channels set up to do that, and we will hold those conversations not in public, but
Last
private.
question, is that a real-time channel? Like, could they?
Yeah, the mechanism is already up and engaging. We're putting more steps in place to formalize it over the coming days, but it is already up and working.
And that mechanism would allow either side to immediately in real time call in potential violations?
It allows
It
allows both sides to report potential violations of the ceasefire and allows us and our French partners to engage with them as well.
Can I go to
Yeah,
that?
Heba, go ahead.
Yes. So